Let's move to our next topic, that is exception hierarchy. Exception hierarchy is very important topic from interview perspective. They will straight away ask you that what are the different exception classes and how those are organized in exception hierarchy. So you have to learn that, okay? In this hierarchy, Throwable is the topmost parent class of this hierarchy, and this is holding two child. One is exception class, another is error class. Under error class, we have stack overflow error, virtual machine error, out of memory error. All those error related classes are there. Under exception class, we have some checked exception classes such as IO exception, SQL exception, class not found exception. All those checked exceptions comes, and parallel to these checked exceptions we have a class named runtime exception. This runtime exception is basically parent of all runtime or unchecked exception classes. Under this runtime exception class, we have all runtime exception classes such as arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number format exception, array index out of bound exception. Those all exceptions comes under runtime exception. So what you need to remember is the topmost parent is throwable, which is holding exception and error childs. And under exceptions, we have first checked exceptions, and parallel to checked exceptions, we have runtime exception. And runtime exception is a parent of all the runtime exception classes. So this is a kind of high level overview on exception hierarchy, and they will ask this very repeatedly. Now let's understand some of the runtime exception classes. First of all, we have null pointer exception. This exception usually comes when you are trying to access some method or some data member with null object reference. Then this null pointer exception comes. It is simply saying that you are pointing to the method or data member with null reference, and that's why null pointer exception comes. For example, here I have string variable which is holding null reference, and then I try to call a method on this string object, and that method cannot be executed because object is null, and that's why you will get null pointer exception. Similar to that, there is another exception called number format exception. This exception comes when you are trying to perform typecasting on some value, and you want to convert that into number, but your format is not acceptable, it is unexpected. Okay, for example, I have a string and that is holding some characters which are not numeric characters, and when you try to convert that into integer, obviously abc cannot be converted into integer, so you will get number format exception. If you try to convert some string or some characters which cannot be directly converted into integer, or their formats are not correct, then you will get this number format exception. Array index out of bound exception. This exception usually comes when you try to access some memory location that is not even reserved by you. Okay, for example, I have created one array with 3 memory containers, and then you will try to access fourth memory container by passing 5 as an index. Then because you didn't even reserve that, you can't access that, and you will start getting array index out of bound exception. Okay, similar to that, we have another exception known as arithmetic exception. This exception usually comes when you try to make division by 0. And for that, we have infinite, and we cannot define infinite in Java. So we will get this exception in that particular case, that is arithmetic exception. From mathematical perspective or from programmatical perspective, you cannot have some expression which is holding infinite. So from anywhere inside your mathematical expression in program, if there is a result which is infinite, then you will probably get this exception, arithmetic exception. Okay. Now let's move to the next one, which is a difference between class not found exception and no class definition found error. This is a very repeatedly asked interview question. They will ask you this difference. Okay. Let's first talk about no class definition found error. If you are trying to refer a class, for example, you have class A and class B, okay, and class A is internally associating with class B, you are referring class B, okay. So when compiling class A, it will try to locate the bytecode or class file of class B. But if it will not find the bytecode or class file of class B, then it will start giving you this error, no class definition found error. This just simply comes when you are referring to some class and that class is not compiled properly. Due to that, class file could not be generated, and due to that you will get this exception, no class definition found error. Okay. The other one is exception. So the first difference between both of them is class not found is an exception and no class definition found is an error, and this is the error one. Now when this class not found exception come, for example, you are having in your workspace, you are having different dependencies or jar files. Okay. Now you are using some jar file or some existing library class into your code, and let's suppose with that jar, that class is not updated, or that version of jar is not holding that particular class. Okay. And due to that, when you start compiling your code, the class will not be located in your class path, or is not available in the jar version, or is missing in that jar version. In that case, you will start getting this class not found exception. Okay, so in order to resolve that issue, most of the time we have to either update the jar or we have to update some certain version. Okay, and we have to make sure that that class which we are actually accessing or referring in our class, that class must be there in existing library. Once it will be there, then only our code will again start working. These are the practical differences between both of them.